After several minutes, the commandant of the house, Yakov Yurovsky, enters the room along with a group of armed men. Yurovsky reads a brief statement aloud, informing the family that the Ural Regional Soviet has decided they are to be executed, effective immediately. Nicholas, according to multiple surviving accounts, has time only to say, "What?" before the shooting begins. The noise and smoke from repeated gunfire filling a space with no ventilation. To this night, Alexandra and her daughters had sewn diamonds and other precious jewels into the linings of their corsets, intended to fund an escape they still hoped for. This concealed jewelry, ironically, becomes a form of armor. July 16th, 1918. Yekaterinburg, Russia. Inside a repurposed merchant's house called the Ipatiev House, Tsar Nicholas II writes a final entry in his diary before bed. He notes the temperature, a brief walk in the courtyard, nothing more. He has no idea it is the last entry he will ever write. For 14 months, the former imperial family has lived as prisoners. Since Nicholas abdicated the Russian throne in March of 1917, he, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son, have been moved from palace to prison to this final house. Guarded first by the provisional government, then by the Bolsheviks after the October Revolution brought them to power. The Ipatiev house sits behind a tall wooden fence, built specifically to block the family's view of the outside world and the world's view of them. Windows are painted over. The family is permitted brief walks in a small courtyard, church services on occasion, and little else. Their guards, ordinary Bolshevik soldiers, are rotated regularly, some kind, some openly hostile to the family they now watch over. By the summer of 1918, the political situation around them grows increasingly unstable. The Russian Civil War rages across the country. A force known as the White Army advances steadily toward Yekaterinburg from the east. Local Bolshevik leaders grow anxious. If the city falls, the imperial family could be captured and used as a rallying symbol. Moscow's central government, led by Vladimir Lenin, has never publicly ordered the family's execution, at least not in any surviving written record. But historians widely believe verbal authorization passed down through trusted channels, designed specifically to leave no paper trail connecting Lenin directly to what happens next. On the evening of July 16th, the family's routine appears unchanged. They eat dinner, the children play. Alexandra and her daughters spend part of the evening doing needlework, a habit that will matter greatly in the hours to come, though none of them yet know why. Nicholas reads aloud to the family, as he often does in the evenings. Just after midnight, transitioning into July 17th, the family's physician, Dr. Eugene Bodkin, is woken and told the family must dress and come downstairs immediately. The official explanation given is that anti-Bolshevik forces are approaching the city and the family needs to be moved to safety in a lower room, away from potential street fighting. Nicholas, Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their 13-year-old son, Alexei, who suffers from hemophilia and cannot walk on his own that night, are woken and dressed. Alexandra requests 2 chairs be brought down, one for herself, one for Alexei, who Nicholas carries in his arms down the stairs. 4 servants accompany them. All 4 have remained loyal to the family throughout their imprisonment, refusing offers to leave. Tonight, that loyalty will cost them their lives alongside the family they served. The group is led into a small semi-basement room, roughly 11 feet by 13 feet, with a single barred window high on one wall. Alexei is placed in a 3rd chair nearby, too weak from his condition to stand for long. The family waits in near silence. Some later accounts suggest they seem calm, even reassured by the ordinary explanation given for the move. They have no reason yet to suspect anything beyond another disruptive but survivable night. After several minutes, the commandant of the house, Yakov Yurovsky, enters the room along with a group of armed men. Yurovsky reads a brief statement aloud, informing the family that the Ural Regional Soviet has decided they are to be executed, effective immediately. Nicholas, according to multiple surviving accounts, has time only to say, "What?" before the shooting begins. Yurovsky reportedly fires the first shot directly at the former Tsar. Chaos follows almost instantly. The small room becomes a killing chamber for 11 people at close range, the noise and smoke from repeated gunfire filling a space with no ventilation. What the executioners do not anticipate is the needlework. In the weeks leading up to this night, Alexandra and her daughters had sewn diamonds and other precious jewels into the linings of their corsets, intended to fund an escape they still hoped for. This concealed jewelry, ironically, becomes a form of armor. The room descends into horror. Survivors of the first shots are finished with bayonets and additional close-range gunfire. It takes several minutes, far longer than the executioners intended, for all 11 people to be confirmed dead. Yurovsky later writes in his own account that the scene was far messier than planned. The family dog Jimmy is killed as well. The bodies are wrapped and loaded onto a truck before dawn, driven to a forest clearing outside the city. The plan is simple: dump the bodies down a mine shaft and collapse the entrance. But complications arise almost immediately. The mine proves too shallow to conceal the bodies effectively. The truck itself becomes stuck in mud, delaying the operation for hours. Panicking as dawn approaches, Yurovsky makes a desperate decision. The bodies are pulled back out of the shallow mine. In a nearby clearing, the men attempt to destroy the remains using sulfuric acid and fire. 2 of the children's bodies are burned separately and buried in a shallow, disguised grave, a short distance from where the other 9 are eventually reburied beneath a country road. The truck driven directly over the site to hide any trace. For decades, the Soviet government maintains only a vague and shifting public account. But the fate of Alexandra and the children remains deliberately obscured for years. This ambiguity, whether intentional propaganda or genuine uncertainty, fuels decades of rumor and speculation. Numerous women across Europe come forward in the years that follow, each claiming to be Anastasia. The most famous of these claimants, a woman named Anna Anderson, maintains her claim for over 60 years, despite mounting evidence against her account. The Soviet Union itself does not officially acknowledge the full details of the execution until decades later. Not until 1989, under Glasnost, does the burial site become more widely investigated. In 1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the main grave near Yekaterinburg is formally excavated. 9 sets of remains are recovered. Genetic testing confirms the identities by the mid-1990s. 2 bodies remain unaccounted for. Based on Yurovsky's own written account, investigators suspect Alexei and 1 daughter were buried separately from the main grave. For over a decade, this second site remains unfound. In 2007, researchers, working from clues in Yurovsky's decades-old account, locate a second grave, exactly where his note suggested. The remains found there are those of 2 children. DNA testing confirms this find represents the final 2 Romanov children. In 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonizes the family as martyrs and passion bearers. In 1998, 80 years after the execution, the 9 remains are formally reburied in St. Petersburg with state honors, closing, at least officially, a story left unresolved for most of the century. The Ipatiev house itself is demolished by Soviet authorities in 1977. Out of concern, the building had become an unofficial pilgrimage site. Today, a large Orthodox cathedral, the Church on Blood, stands on the site. What remains most striking about the Romanov executions, more than a century later, is not simply the killing of a deposed monarch, but the deliberate, sustained effort to erase the family entirely. The destroyed bodies, the obscured records, and the calculated attempt to leave no clear evidence of who gave the final order to make it happen.